In 1873, a cholera pandemic moved through America. It was hardest on boondocks towns as they had less assets to treat patients and less sterile living conditions. At the time, it was accepted by some that the scourge had been begun by vagrants who had first shown up in New York and afterward moved west. In Yankton in the Dakota Territory, Dr. J. B. Van Velsen depicted transients to his boondocks town as smudged persons. He said they couldn't be constrained to receive clean precautionary measures. As indicated by Velsen, they favored not to utilize toilets, rather peeing and crapping only outside of the structures where they were located. The individuals who contracted cholera frequently passed on rapidly. The malady was known to clear out 50–60% of the number of inhabitants in a wagon train or little settlement. Frequently, towns had to isolate themselves to confine the spread of the disease. It is evaluated that a great many pilgrims who traveled west passed on of infection every year during the 18th and 19th hundreds of years. In 1876, Lieutenant Colonel George Custer lost the Battle of the Little Bighorn against some Native Americans. A short time later, William Frederick Cody, otherwise known as Bison Bill, chose to vindicate Custer. Cody ventured out to Warbonnet Creek, where he assaulted Native Americans in a savage free-for-all. Notoriously, he figured out how to kill one warrior, who was known as Yellow Hair. After expelling the man's scalp, Cody shouted, "The main scalp for Custer." At the time, Cody's demonstration of vengeance was generally welcomed by American pilgrims who additionally needed restitution for Little Bighorn. Notwithstanding, history has assisted with featuring his activities as being amazingly boorish and ridiculous. In fact, he guaranteed further down the road that he lamented what he had done. In 1779, a young lady named Margaret Polly, who was later known as Margaret Handley Erskine, was going with her significant other and her infant from Virginia to Kentucky. They needed to set up another life on the wilderness. During the excursion, they were assaulted by individuals from the Shawnee clan. Margaret's significant other was shot and executed. The clan individuals likewise beat Margaret before mercilessly executing her infant before her. Margaret was then abducted by the Shawnees. Throughout the following 5 years, she lived with them, bringing forth another kid while hostage and enduring an attempt to kill she by one of the tribesmen. She at long last got away from the wild when frontiersmen discovered her and bought her opportunity. They returned her to Virginia. There, she in the long run remarried and carried on with a long life. In 1883, 5 outfitted men entered the town of Bisbee, Arizona, to loot the nearby bank. The looters accepted that the bank was holding the finance for several excavators working for the Copper Queen Mining Company. However, the hoodlums had coordinated the burglary ineffectively. The finance had not been stored into the bank yet. Taking what they could, the criminals left the bank and were quickly entangled in a gunfight in the city of Bisbee. At the point when the fight was more than 3 townsmen and a pregnant lady were dead. The posse immediately mounted their ponies and braved of town. John Heath sorted out a group from the town to find and secure the criminals. The force bombed in their mission. However, on account of crafted by investigators, each of the 5 desperados were in the end found and captured. Upon their catch, they ensnared a 6th man, none other than John Heath. Filling in as an inside man, he had purportedly been the genius behind the whole bank heist. All 5 looters were condemned to death. The censured men kicked the bucket in what is as yet Arizona's biggest mass hanging. John Heath, who was attempted independently, was just condemned to life in jail since every one of the 5 outlaws decided to deny his association during the preliminary. In any case, the townsfolk were not happy with this result and chosen to assume control over the issue. An irate horde raged the prison, took Heath outside, and lynched him from a telephone pole. As one of the worst natural disasters in American history, the Great Flood of 1862 ruined thousands of people's lives. The flood, which was caused by an unprecedented amount of rain and snow, lasted for over 40 days. As of this writing, it still holds the record in California, Oregon, and Nevada for the largest flood in each state's history. The deluge swelled rivers to the breaking point, with water spilling across the land and ruining everything in its way. Entire towns were obliterated, leaving thousands displaced and fighting for survival. Although the number of deaths was relatively low, the economic implications of the flood were enormous, with livestock killed and infrastructure destroyed. It took more than 10 years for the stricken areas to recover. Thousands of people never overcame the impoverishment caused by the flood. In 1827, Josiah P. Wilbarger manufactured a ranch on the Colorado River. At some point, he and his gathering were out exploring when a few individuals from the Comanche clan assaulted Wilbarger's gathering. 2 of Wilbarger's men were murdered promptly while another 2 escaped. Wilbarger himself was hit by 2 bolts, 1 in every leg, and was additionally struck by a slug on his neck. Realizing that playing dead was his solitary possibility of endurance, Wilbarger lay still as the adversary drew nearer. At that point, all of a sudden, one of the tribesmen got Wilbarger's head and scalped him. How he didn't shout in torment is a wonder. After the tribesman left, Wilbarger lay in distress while dreams of his sister, Margaret, guaranteed him that help would come. To be sure, the individuals who had gotten away from the assault returned to the homestead, and a gathering set out to help Wilbarger. At last, he endured the ordeal. For 11 years, he approached his everyday business with a unique top on his head to cover the region where his scalp had once been. Tragically, he inadvertently thumped his head against a pillar one day. This brought about a disease which guaranteed his life. In 1823, trapper Hugh Glass was assaulted by a bear in South Dakota while on an undertaking. In spite of the fact that he had the option to execute the bear, Glass was left severely injured by the assault. He had endured a messed up leg, a tore scalp, a punctured throat, and various gashes. His Endeavor accomplices, John Fitzgerald and Jim Bridger, accepted that Glass would not endure his wounds. Following a few days, they chose to place him in a shallow grave, take his weapons, and leave him for dead. Glass, in any case, had different plans. In the wake of recovering some quality, he started the excursion back to development. This roughly 320-kilometer, 200 miles, outing would have been troublesome under the most favorable circumstances. Be that as it may, for somebody as severely harmed as Glass, it was an imposing ordeal. On numerous events, his horrifying torment constrained him to creep for a significant distance. In any case, in the long run, he showed up at his goal. After he recouped, he set out to deliver retribution on Fitzgerald and Bridger. In any case, after following them down, he chose to excuse them. Does this story sound strangely natural? It was the motivation behind the 2015 film The Revenant, which featured Leonardo DiCaprio. The account of the Donner Party is a stunning story of misery, starvation, and human flesh consumption. In 1846, a gathering of 89 individuals, drove by Jacob and George Donner, left Springfield, Illinois, to begin another life in California. During the underlying piece of the excursion, individuals from the Paiute clan took or executed huge numbers of the gathering's dairy cattle. Be that as it may, this was just the beginning of their troubles. Attempts to discover easy routes cost the gathering significant time. By October, they despite everything had not made it over the Sierra Nevada mountain range to the overall security of California. After substantial snowfall obstructed the go over the mountains, the Donner Party had to set up camp at Truckee Lake and hold up out the severe winter. As the winter delayed and the provisions of nourishment dwindled, starvation and ailing health set in. The individuals who wished to endure had to depend on human flesh consumption by eating their dead associates. A gathering of less than 20 men, ladies, and kids, known as the Forsaken Hope, designed temporary snowshoes and set out from the camp to discover help. Just a couple of made it to the opposite side of the mountains. The rest of the individuals from the gathering kicked the bucket of hypothermia, fatigue, or starvation. The assemblages of the individuals who had fallen were utilized to take care of the survivors. It was not until April 1847 that the last survivor at Truckee Lake was protected. At this point, less than 50 of the first gathering were as yet alive. One night in January 1877, David Lunt was in a cantina in the boondocks town of Deadwood, South Dakota, when an irritated inebriated man entered. As the marshal of the town endeavored to quiet him, the alcoholic unintentionally discharged his gun into Lunt's head. For a great many people, a shot to the head would be the end. Be that as it may, not for David Lunt. He smoothly got up, left the bar, and returned home as spectators gaped at the slug gap in his mind. Lunt proceeded with day-by-day life and appeared to have no torment. In any case, following 2 months, he started to grumble of compounding cerebral pains. A brief time frame later, Lunt kicked the bucket. The dissection uncovered that the projectile had made a terminal sore structure in his cerebrum. John Colter, a legend of the American outskirts, went through the greater part of his time on Earth in the wild. In 1803, he joined the Lewis and Clark expedition where he picked up prestige as perhaps the best tracker and scouts. After the endeavor, Colter worked for the Missouri Fur Company and was sent on exploring missions to caution Native American clans that the organization was making a beeline for them and needed to trade. He is to a great extent thought to be the principal individual to see Jackson Hole and Yellowstone Lake. Individuals later named Yellowstone and close by locales as Colter's Hell in reference to his portrayals of the percolating water and other geothermal action for which the region is known. Sources fluctuate with respect to the land meaning of Colter's Hell. In 1809, Colter was caught by Blackfoot warriors. They stripped him exposed and took everything from him before saying that he was allowed to leave. Colter couldn't accept his amazing good fortune until he understood that he had quite recently become piece of a horrifying round of human chasing for sport. The warriors pursued him. In spite of the fact that he evaded the greater part of them, he had to confront one, killing the man with his own lance before taking his cover and stowing away in a waterway to keep away from the others. Over the following 11 days, Colter made the burdensome 320-kilometer, 200 miles, venture back to Progress. He ate bark and roots and had just the cover for warmth. Having endured this experience, he chose to come back to development and carry on with a calmer life. Thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.